In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to build a gun box kind of like this in a small John boat just like this. If you've been following along with our duck boat project build, you'll notice that there's a few things different since the last time we worked on this boat when we built the gun tray over there. If you're not following along, I'll leave a link one of these places up here so you can check out the entire playlist on this build. We've done a ton of stuff. We cut out the benches, we put in a subfloor, we built a gun tray over here, we started framing in the front deck. But in this video, we're going to be building the gun box, framing it out, and getting it all ready to move on to the next step, which is going to be the front deck. If you've been following along, the last time you saw this boat, none of this was painted and the front deck up here was not painted. What we did is went ahead and sanded everything down, gave it a coat of primer and a coat of paint, because once we start framing everything in, it's going to be really hard to get in there and get everything painted. The easiest thing to do is to go ahead and paint everything now while we have it wide open, and then we can come back and do any touch-ups later on that we need. It'll be a lot easier than trying to paint the whole entire thing when we got the gun box all framed in and the front deck all framed in. So we painted this a couple days ago, let it dry, and that brings us to today. We're going to go ahead and start framing in our gun box. We're going to start right up here. So before we frame anything, I want to go ahead and close this wall off. And I'm going to use a scrap piece of our 090 that we actually cut from our subfloor. It actually came off of this piece right here. And the reason I want to cover that up is because that's going to be the front wall of our gun box. So we're going to start by finding the angle of the floor up to this wall. And I'm going to do that with my cheap little Harbor Freight angle finder. I'm going to lay it down flat on the floor and then push this up against that wall and lock it down. That will give me the angle that I need. The next thing I'll need is an approximate measurement of how long this wall is on this side. So I'll start down here and go up here. Looks like we're about 9 3/4 inches. I'm gonna take my sheet right here and write 9 3/4. So here's how we'll lay out the first cut. I'll take that angle that I have and I'm just gonna put me a little dashed line right there. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to measure up 9 3/4 and see where that puts us at. I'm going to take one of my scrap pieces of angle and lay that on that line and see if there's a gap between here and there. And it looks like there is, so I can move this in about that same angle, put a mark right here, and we're going to redraw that line and see where we're at. Take my angle and trace the rest of that line on up and see where that puts us. All right, so I'm a little bit off. That's not a big deal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some acetone. This is a little hack for you. You take some acetone and you can wipe off permanent marker from aluminum. Now I left that little bitty mark right there. So what I can do is go just a little bit past it, redraw that line, and then see where we end up at. Now I can remeasure this and see if we're at that 9 3/4. We are just a little bit under it. If I was to cut this on this side of it, it would put me right where I need to be. With that clamped down, we can go ahead and make our cut. Back over here at the boat, I'm going to slide this as far over as I can get it, and then just make sure I'm holding it flat down here on the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and trace me a line all the way across where I need to cut this down to size. With it clamped down to my table, I can go ahead and make that cut. See how it fits? Then I'm going to come in here on the back side and make a mark. So with that mark, I know to cut this at the end of our upright support here, and this is going to be our under storage section right there. That piece clamped to the table, we'll go ahead and make this cut. Give that one last test fit, and it looks pretty good. Line this up exactly where I want it. Put me a clamp on here, and we can start riveting this piece in. So you notice that I didn't put a whole lot of rivets up here in the top. I just put one in each corner just to hold it in place. The reason I haven't put any more rivets up in this top piece is because we're going to be adding another section of framing here, and I don't need to be drilling through rivets that I've already installed. And the next thing we're going to do is start fitting up our gun box lid. Now, when I originally laid this in here, up here in the front, this little section would not allow the edge of the lid to go all the way up to the side of the boat, because this angle is just a little bit wider than the space that we have on this top flange piece of the gun box lid. So all I did was make a mark on my aluminum angle right here, move the lid out of the way. Then I used an angle grinder to just cut this lip back about 1/4 inch just to give me enough space so that when I install this lid right here, it'll slide all the way up against the wall of the boat and won't leave any gap on this side. The next step is going to be to take one of our 6-foot pieces of angle and put it underneath the bench and get it all the way up against the back wall of that bench. And I'm going to take this clamp and spring clamp this in place so it holds that end up. The next thing I did was take a piece of 1¼ inch tube that comes in the kit, and I cut it to fit underneath this part of the framing so that it will hold up our lid. Essentially, we're going to be doing the exact same thing we did for the gun tray. If you didn't see that video, go back and watch it. We're going to frame this in much the same manner. I'm going to take my big long level and lay it across here and make sure that I've got this nice and flat all the way to the back deck of the boat. And when you're cutting this piece, you're probably going to have to do some trial and error. You can take a measurement first just to cut it down to size, and then you may have to cut just like a blade width or half a blade width off until you get it down to where this is sitting nice and level. One thing I'm not a huge fan of is this little lip that we have from where the angle does not go all the way up to the inside edge of the lid here. So I'm going to take me a little mark right here on the inside of where this track portion ends. It's kind of hard to see. I got a shadow there, but my mark is just to the inside of there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece of angle out, and I'm going to trim about that much off of the inside of this. If I can get that angle squeezed in just a little bit further, there'll be a nice rollover lip here instead of a little ledge like this one has right now. Once you get this thing clamped up to the side of your workbench, there's a bunch of different ways you can cut this. You can cut it with a skill saw if you wanted to. You could probably just do this with an angle grinder. I've got a lot of tools at my disposal, so the one I'm going to be using today is this metal shear. They're about 60 or 70 bucks at either Harbor Freight or Northern Tool. You can probably get them online. But this is what I'm going to use to cut just a thin strip all the way down this piece of angle. I'll go ahead and put my clamps back in like I had them before. And I'm going to hold this just up to the edge so this is nice and flush all the way down. So with that in place, we can take our big square here and line it up to the edge of this piece of angle. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to make me some marks on the floor so that we can figure out where our bottom angle piece needs to go. While we've already got this semi-mocked up, I'm going to go ahead and measure out this last piece of angle that I'm going to need for the front here. Line all this up by eye, and I'm just holding this flush against the front of that. And then I'm going to have a mark here where I'm going to start my notch just like we did on the other side, and then I'm going to have a mark here where I actually need to make the cut for this. So I made that first cut to cut it down to length, and then this right here is the notch that I cut out. And I just did this with a jigsaw real quick. And I'll just check our fit real quick. And that looks good. So now that we've got that cut, we can take all this stuff apart. Now we can come in here with another 6-foot piece of angle and go ahead and line it up against this back wall and then try to get it as close as we can to these marks that we put on the floor. Once we got it lined up, I can go ahead and start throwing in some rivets. So I threw a couple of rivets in here and I used these countersinks just like this. And I only put those on the ribs that run along because we're going to have our vertical supports right there. And I don't want to have to worry about hitting the head of a rivet when I go to put those vertical supports in. Now that only gave me a couple of rivets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back with these regular dome head rivets and fill in all the spaces in between so that that is really good and secure to the subfloor. Getting up underneath this bench is going to be kind of difficult. That's where a right angle drill like this comes in handy. So now we need to put in this very last piece. I took that scrap that I cut a piece from earlier, and I'm just going to go ahead and make me a little mark right here. With this cut down to size, I'm going to set that in place, and you can see there's a gap right here because the subfloor starts to curve up. So what we're going to need to do is put a mark right here in the middle, and we're going to cut a notch in this just like we did when we framed in the wall for the gun tray. Now you can cut this with an angle grinder if you want. I'm just going to use a bandsaw because it's real quick and easy, and I have one. That should give me just enough flex to where I can get this in there, just like that. Now to help guide me and make sure that I put this in straight, I'm going to take another 6-foot piece of angle and I'm going to clamp it in place just like that. So with that clamped in, that'll give me a guide so that I can go ahead and put these rivets in without any issues, and this will be nice and straight. Get it all lined back up like we had it before. Clamp that in place. With that bottom angle piece in there, this upright support is probably going to be way too long. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it down to size on the miter saw. Just give that a quick check with our level, make sure we're good and we're not high in the middle. I'm going to start back here and drill a couple holes so that we can attach this angle to this back deck. Now I'm going to come in here and give this one quick check with my square and make sure that this upright angle piece is nice and straight. Then I'm going to go ahead and drill me a couple of rivets in here just to get this secured. Before we go any further, I want to make sure that I'm supporting the distance of this wall from the edge of the boat. I took a measurement from the inside of this wall to the inside of where our vertical wall is going to go, and I cut me just a piece of scrap angle that I had. We're going to install that just like this. Now I cut this to fit exactly so that when I push on this outside wall, it is right here flush with the edge of the lid. And I did that because in order to install this piece, I'm going to have to remove this lid out of the way, and I'm not going to have that lid to help me judge how wide this piece needs to be, because there is a little bit of flex in this wall because we don't have it supported yet. If you don't cut this to where it fits tight, what you could end up doing is actually pushing this too far in and the edge of the lid will hang over. So I'm going to hold this in place and put a mark here and a mark there so I know where to mount this piece of angle at. Now I can remove this lid out of the way and I can clamp this in place. I'm just going to squeeze that tight so it doesn't go anywhere. Then I'll do that same thing over here. Just got to make sure that this is pushed tight up against the side of the boat. Now we can double check and make sure that our lid still fits. Now it looks good. The next step is going to be putting in our upright support that's going to split the difference between this piece of angle that's running along the gun block and then this piece that we're going to put in next. That's going to run all the way up to the front deck. So I've positioned this so that it's in between our two pieces here, and I'm going to split the difference and try to get it as close in the middle as I can. And I'm going to clamp that in place on one side. And then up here at the top, I'm going to do the same thing. Now, because we're splitting the difference between these two, it may not be exactly square, and that's okay. Nobody's going to see this after we get done with it. Then we're going to go ahead and throw a rivet in up here and a rivet down in the bottom. All right, now we'll take our neck piece of angle that's going up here at the top, and we'll go ahead and clamp it into place, get a rivet in that one. Now I can go ahead and take these clamps off and get the rest of my rivets in. I'm going to put two more up here in the top, and then I'm going to offset these two down here at the bottom. Now I can come up here and using that mark that we made earlier, clamp this in place real quick and go ahead and get a rivet in it. Next up is going to be our vertical supports. I've already pre-cut them, and we are going to be placing those directly in line with all of the ribs that we have in the floor. And we're going to start up front and work our way back. Now up here on this front wall, we're not going to put in a square tube vertical support like we have on everything else in this boat. We're actually going to be using a piece of angle, and it's going to fit just behind the two pieces that we already have. I'm going to start by putting a couple of rivets in to the wall, just like this. Now I'm not going to worry about putting any rivets in from this because when we sheet this, we'll end up putting rivets in through the sheeting, and it'll go through both pieces of aluminum angle, and I'll tie all that together real tight. For our vertical supports, we're going to do it the exact same way that we did these. We put two rivets in top, two rivets in the bottom, and just use that square and make sure we've got them in nice and straight. Now we're going to start framing up the supports to go from the side wall of the boat out to the side wall of our gun box. And the first one I'm going to do is going to be right here, and it's going to double up these two pieces of angle because this is where our lid is going to sit on this side. And then when we go to sheet this, if we don't put this piece here, we'll have nothing to attach the sheet to. And I'm just going to butt these together kind of like a T, and you'll be able to see that here in a video, but I'm going to put two just regular rivets through the front of this. Then we're going to come up here on top and throw in some countersink rivets up here. And then moving on down, I've already pre-cut some pieces. We're gonna go right in here and get this up next to this vertical support and put in a couple rivets up top. And our next one's gonna go right here up against this vertical support. Then our last piece, I had to cut just a little bit of an angle off of the side here to get it to fit, and that's gonna go right up against this wall. So that's it for the framing of the gun box. It was fairly simple, fairly straightforward. It's kind of the same thing we did over on the tray side, just a little bit different. All we're really doing is just making one really big long box. Now here's what's cool. I designed this, if you want to do this in your kit, you can do it the exact same way we did. You can make it shorter if you want to, but I designed this so that if you do decide that you want to use this boat during the summertime or the spring and go fishing, I want to be able to put rods in here. Well, guess what? Our box is 8 feet, 1.5 inches long. So you got more than enough room to put multiple shotguns in here during duck season. Or if you're going to use this boat during fishing season, you also got some room to store some gear and a few fishing rods in here as well. That's going to do it for this portion of the video. Up next, we're going to be moving on to framing the front deck. And we've also got to frame in our rear notch back in the back, and then we'll be completely done framing and it'll be time to move on to sheeting. So we'll do all the framing in one video. We'll do all the sheeting in one video. We'll be moving on to paint, turf, getting the motor on this thing. It's going to be ready to rock and roll. Stick around and make sure that if you haven't checked out the previous videos, here's the playlist link right up here in one of these corners right here. You can go check out all the videos that we've done on this particular boat project.